baby. And she came back home. That's when it was real bad. She ran away immediately, I think, and was caught by authorities, sent to juvenile home for a while.
Several months later, after Aileen had returned home, her grandmother, Britta Wuornos, passed away. Her grandfather decided that he'd had enough of the difficult teenager.
Shortly after his grandmother's death, her grandfather basically kicked her out of the house.
He said, "Don't you step another foot back in this house, because I can't deal with you kids again."
Aileen and Keith left home at the same time. He stayed with friends in the neighborhood, and she struck out on her own, using the only tools she knew to survive.
So at 15, she hit the road and earned her living prostituting.
When she lived on the road, she truly lived on the road. She didn't have nowhere to go.
I think most people in the neighborhood were probably happy that she was gone. It sounds bad now, but she didn't have that many friends anyway.
Aileen Wuornos would spend the next 2 decades trying to find a place to call home, even as her life spiraled more and more out of control. In 1971, 15-year-old Aileen Wuornos was kicked out of her grandparents' house in Troy, Michigan. The troubled teenager headed west, hitchhiking on the interstates.
Lord, I hit the road at around 16, aimlessly everywhere but going nowhere.
She was really just wandering, drifting aimlessly from staying with one person to staying with another, you know, kind of hippie life, if you will. It was really like an extended version of the Lost Weekend. Drugs, booze, hitchhiking, partying.
For 5 years, she drifted around the country, eventually finding her way to Colorado. There, she traded on her looks in the dangerous world of prostitution.
A lot of these people, when they can get what they want out of you, then they get mean with you. Because that's a rough life, especially being a girl like she was.
In her mind, that was the best she could do. That's what she was good at. That's what she could earn a living at. That was all she could earn a living at.
She didn't wear the leather skirts and the mini skirts and the stiletto heels. She wore shorts and t-shirts.
Aileen's wild ways and explosive temper often got her in trouble with the law. The teenager was arrested for disorderly conduct and wanted for grand larceny. Finally, in early 1976, she settled in Daytona Beach, Florida.
I think that the promise of sun and fun is the traditional lure of Florida, and I don't think it was any different for Aileen.
She left Michigan because it was so cold on her feet and the hitchhike and stuff, and she went to Florida so she could sleep on the beach and still do her prostitution.
I wound up playing the harlot out there and committing adultery, I'm sure, since I went to bed with so many married men, while I thieved and ripped them off, too.
Her first year in the Sunshine State was a turbulent one. The 20-year-old received word that her grandfather had been found dead in his garage in Michigan, an apparent suicide. That spring, Aileen abruptly married a 70-year-old retiree named Louis Fell. Aileen met Louis when he picked her up hitchhiking.
I had gotten a letter from her when she married that old man. That was so funny. She married him so she wouldn't have to be on the road is all.
He was pretty well off, and perhaps it was her best chance of some kind of normal life because he was spending money on her, but she was not able to curtail those outbursts and to behave like a normal person.
The marriage ended after only 9 weeks. Louis filed for divorce, claiming Aileen had hit him with his cane when he stopped giving her spending money. And then came the most difficult blow. In July 1976, her brother Keith died of throat cancer.
She loved Keith a lot. She was, of course, devastated.
He was her ally, and for all the fighting that went on between them, he stood by her. He was loyal to her.
Aileen drowned her sorrows in alcohol and went right back to her vagabond lifestyle. She worked the exit ramps up and down the Florida highways, taking on customers wherever she could.
That's when I didn't really want to hear from her. because I didn't know where she was going to be next, what she was going to do, and could she be dead.
In 1978, at the age of 22, Aileen decided she couldn't take any more of her hardscrabble existence. One afternoon, she took a .22 caliber pistol and shot herself in the abdomen. At the hospital, she told doctors it was not the first time she had attempted suicide. She recovered from the gunshot wound, but she received minimal psychological counseling. 3 years later, in May 1981, in a drunken stupor, she robbed this Edgewater, Florida mini-mart at gunpoint.
She had had an argument, I guess, with this fellow who she had lived with for about a year. And she was trying to get his attention in whatever way to see how he would react if she did a robbery.
So she went into a little mini-mart, clutching her gun and wearing a bikini, if you can believe it, and held the gun in front of the woman cashier, frightened the cashier to death, and asked for the money that was in the till.
She left the store, went down US 1. A car she was in, an old car, overheated, and that's why she stopped. And by then, they had a description out on her, and the police were everywhere, and they picked her up.
Aileen pleaded guilty to robbery with a weapon and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. She spent her time reading the Bible, complaining about being shut in with lesbian inmates, and waiting to get back together with her boyfriend. Upon her release in 1983, the 27-year-old returned to a life of alcohol, hitchhiking, and prostitution. It was a life not many wanted to share.
She had this feeling that any relationship with a man was not going to last. That something was going to happen, they were going to drop her or dump her, whatever.
Desperate for a connection, she turned to women and quickly found acceptance.
I became a lesbian around 28, and all of it would get me in a world of trouble.
Aileen began cruising the biker bars of South Florida during the spring of 1986. Dubbed Lee by her new circle of acquaintances, she soon found a girlfriend, 24-year-old Tyra Moore.
Aileen met Tyra Moore, who was to be the most important romantic relationship in her entire life, in a biker bar.
She was in there alone, I was in there alone. We started a conversation, and she went home with me that night.
They shut the bedroom door, and they stayed in the bedroom for an entire weekend and didn't emerge, really, except for to grab some food. So from then on, they became inseparable. That was